in 1946, the United States had defeated the Axis powers. It saved the free world. It avoided attack on the continental United States. The U.S. was over 50% of the global economy. The dollar was as good as gold, and we had over 16 people working for every person retired. We were it. We invested in the defeated Axis powers through the Marshall Plan and also similar activities in Japan and other parts to promote global economic growth and global trade, to try to heal the wounds between the nations. We invested in critical infrastructure through the highway bill, for example. We invested in human capital through the GI Bill. We brought back fiscal discipline. We proposed pro-economic growth policies, and debt to GDP plummeted from 120% of GDP at the end of World War II in 1946 down to the 30 percentiles range in 1980. But then we lost our way. We regained it for temporarily in the 90s, but we've lost it again. We have Democratic spending policies in Washington, big spending, Republican tax policies, low taxes. The math translates to big deficits, mounting debt burdens. And in the recent times, we've taken some steps which I'll come back to, but we're treating the symptoms, not the disease, and I'll come back to that. 2003. Three things happened in 2003 that demonstrated to me that Washington was out of touch and out of control. Number one, second round of tax cuts. We couldn't afford them. We'd already returned to deficits. They were debt-financed tax cuts. Number two, we invaded a sovereign nation without declaring war and without paying for it, called Iraq. And my son was a captain in the Marine Corps in Iraq, went in the first night, first wave. Thirdly, Medicare prescription drugs was enacted into law, added $8 trillion in new unfunded obligations for Medicare when Medicare was already underfunded $20 trillion. And the so-called party of fiscal responsibility was in charge of the Senate, the House, and the White House. Newsflash, there is no party of fiscal responsibility. There are people who are fiscally responsible, but not enough of them. And in addition, we have a situation today where not only do we have fiscal challenges, we have political challenges. We have a republic that is not representative of or responsive to the public. Let me repeat that. We have a republic which is a representative democracy that is not representative of Main Street America and not responsive to Main Street America. Why? Because we have a duopoly. That duopoly is called the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They represent less than 60% of the voters of this country and declining. I'm a political independent, and I have been since 1997. We represent 42% of the electorate of this country and increasing. The fact is that because of gerrymandering of districts, where with sophisticated computer modeling, you can go down to the block, we have a situation where politicians pick their constituents rather than constituents picking their politicians. We have a situation where whoever is in charge, whether it be Republicans or Democrats, and this is a nonpartisan statement. I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat or what you are. I don't care. I just want good people trying to solve problems. The fact is that whoever's in charge wants to gerrymander, draw the lines to protect their party and to protect incumbents. And the purpose is to minimize the number of competitive districts consistent with the Voting Rights Act, rather than to maximize the number of competitive districts consistent with the Voting Rights Act. Competition is good for America. Competition created America. We need competition in the political system too. And so we need to, at the state level, in every state, we need to have a more independent approach to redistricting to maximize the number of competitive districts consistent with the Voting Rights Act rather than minimize. Secondly, and the parties won't like this, we need to eliminate Democratic and Republican primaries. You can be whatever you want. The parties can endorse candidates, they can raise money for candidates, they can provide grounds proof to candidates, but every qualified candidate with certain qualification requirements, you've got to have a pretty high bar, runs off in the primary. Everybody votes in the primary, and the top 2 vote getters run off in the general election. These may sound like novel ideas. California's already done them. They did them in 2010, they're effective in 2012, and they're starting to revitalize their republic and their democracy. Florida needs to consider doing the same. We need campaign finance reform, and in my view, we need 12-year term limits for people in federal elective office, because our founders never intended us to have career politicians. That's part of our problem. We need to deal with that situation. So where do we go from here? On the fiscal front, there's a false sense of security in Washington because the deficit has gone down from $1.1 trillion to an estimated $650 billion. Believe me, $650 billion is real money. There are people in Washington that don't think it's real money, and they say problem solved. But let's analyze how they got there. They got there primarily because they did 2 things. One, they did the fiscal cliff, which raised taxes on the so-called wealthy. We can debate what wealthy is, but the so-called wealthy, but it didn't reform the tax system. And we have an abomination of a tax system. It's way too complicated. It's not competitive, and it doesn't generate adequate revenues. And I'm a CPA who prepares his own tax return. You know, my view is that your system is not acceptable unless 90% of individuals can prepare their own tax return. 90% of individuals. That's called simplification. That's where we need to go. But we need to be more competitive, too. So first, we raise taxes on the wealthy on a system that's non-competitive, non-sustainable, and that even honest people may not be complying with it, even though not intentionally not trying to comply. Secondly, we had the so-called sequester. What was the sequester? The across-the-board minding spending cuts that were dictated by a so-called tactical nuclear weapon that was never supposed to go off. But things are so dysfunctional in Washington that it went off. And so what did? We cut defense and non-defense discretionary spending in an absolute mindless across-the-board meat-axe approach. Do we need to reduce defense and non-defense spending? Absolutely. But we need to use our brains and figure out how to do it without compromising national security, without shredding the social safety net, and being able to do some things that, frankly, government needs to do. So what do we need to do? We have to recognize that the American people are way ahead of the politicians. I've been to all 50 states. I've had town hall meetings, business community leaders, editorial boards, college campuses, all 50 states. This past fall, I did representative town hall meetings where we recruited demographically representative groups of voters, told them the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, talked to them about principles and values to bring us together. How do we reform the budget system? Taxes, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, health care. What do we do in defense? What do we do to improve the economy, efficiency, effectiveness in government? And how can we end up revitalizing our political system? Specific reforms that I won't go into here, but I will answer questions on if you want. And here's the result. 97% said putting our nation's finances in order should be a top priority for the Congress and the President. But only 8% had confidence that they could do the job this year. We got to close that gap. Secondly, 92% agreed on 6 principles for a fiscal grand bargain. 92%, representative group of voters. 85% agreed that it was going to take a combination of spending reductions and additional revenues, weighted at least 2-to-1 to spending reductions to revenues. And then we talked about specific reforms to budget controls, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, health care, taxes, defense, management reforms, and political reforms. The minimum support we got for specific reforms, 77%, up to 90%. So what's the problem? Because the people are ahead of the politicians. Because the biggest deficit this country has is a leadership deficit, especially in Washington, D.C. You know, you have to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You have to build a burning platform. You have to help people understand that if we don't address these issues, our future position in the world, our future standard of living at home, our future domestic tranquility in our streets is at risk. We are mortgaging the future of our kids and grandkids at record rates. We are reducing relative investments in their future at a time that they're going to face a lot tougher competition and an increasingly interconnected and interdependent global marketplace. That is irresponsible, it is unethical, it is immoral, and it must stop. But the only way it's going to stop is if the first three words in the Constitution come alive. We the people. We the people are responsible and accountable for what does or does not happen. And that's what I try to do. Meaningful citizen education engagement, the facts, the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, nonpartisan solutions that ought to be able to get bipartisan support, and we can achieve a so-called fiscal grand bargain that will result in reforming these different areas, phased in over time to get the power of compounding working for us if we can get more leadership from the President and if the bipartisan leaders of Congress will work together to listen to the American people. They need to be in the listening mode, because if they listen to the American people, they will see the way forward. Because the people care about this country, they care about their families, they know you can't spend a lot more money than you make, charge it to the credit card, self-deal in your own debt without having a day of reckoning. Let me come to closure here by saying that I know that here in Florida, you're in much better shape than most states. I can't comment on your localities, but you know, unfortunately, I moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is ground zero of fiscal irresponsibility in America. God may have moved me there because we are about federal, state, local fiscal responsibility. If, you know, to give you a sense, if Bridgeport was a state and we only have 140,000 residents, we would be number 47 out of 50 in total liabilities and unfunded promises per taxpayer. And it's a city with median household income of $35,000, whereas median household income in America is 50, and median household income in our next door neighbor, Fairfield, which is GE's headquarters, is 95. So we are the land of disparity with no county government, and everybody's on their own. So thank God you don't have that issue you got to deal with. So you're in relatively better condition, but you're also a state that you recently decided you're not going to set up your own exchanges. The federal government will set up your exchanges through the Affordable Care Act. As of now, you're not going to expand Medicaid. I'm happy to get into those issues if you want to. My personal view is the Affordable Care Act is going to cost a lot more money than we're being told, and the chief actuary of Medicare estimates it's going to cost, I'm glad you're sitting down, $10 trillion more than the politicians claim. $10 trillion more. And as a CPA, I can tell you, that's material. You know, I know that you recently did some pension reforms that involves more contributions, among other things. I know you're trying to improve your accounting for that. You know, I know that at least it's projected. I underline the word projected. Projected is based upon certain assumptions, and I know how government can do on assumptions. You're projected to actually have a surplus next year, but I don't know how you define surplus in this state, so I take that with a grain of salt, if you will. So you're in relatively good shape, but you still face the four challenges that every state and locality faces. Unfunded retirement obligations, deteriorating infrastructures, too much spending on consumption, not enough on investment, healthcare cost and long-term care cost, and an outdated tax system. And we need to come together to look at what common challenges are. We need to share successes and replicate successes. We need to avoid common mistakes. I can tell you that that's what my nonprofit's all about.